Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing Live Show number 478. I am your host, Lon Gray. Happy October for all of us that are not dealing with the curveballs that life sends us. I'm speaking specifically of those that were directly impacted by Hurricane Elaine that came into the U.S. I did get an email from a young gentleman out of Japan, in Kyoto Prefecture, that referred to the fact that, obviously we're based in the US. He was very kind. And he says, obviously you're based in the US and so forth, we understand, but you often refer to the impacts that are happening solely in the United States and not globally, such as the typhoons that have occurred in the Philippines and southern China and Japan and so forth. And they have as much as an effect on the local economies as what you refer to in the US. And I completely agree. And I apologize for not being global in the perspective of it. I would say I would not defer any defense to it, but there's a bias of news that we get in the United States, U.S. centric, as any local businesses are, or local news coverages are globally in their individual countries. But it does preclude the fact of awareness sometimes, and I do apologize because I do keep up on global hospitality industry things, but not always global local news in the sense of storms and impact and so forth. But that being said, there is a real and present tragedy that's gone on with Helene, especially in the central United States, as they are struggling to go through this. I have first-person empathy for them of what it's really like, the appreciation of electricity, appreciation of internet connectivity, communications, water, power, electricity, power, obviously, food, sustainable living accommodations, and air conditioning. Things that we just inherently as a culture tend to take for granted until they're taken out of our lives. So, it goes all the way down here through to Florida. We here in Southwest Florida suffered some. North of me more than down here. We got our brunt 2 years ago, and there is still some damage from it locally. But in contrast to what is progressively north of us, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota, Bradenton, Punta Gorda, all the west coast of Florida, going up into the Big Bend area, Cypress Key, and then just swathing its way up into the Carolinas, Western Carolinas, North and South, and Eastern Tennessee. I know we're not reaching to everyone there because they have much more important things to do, if even they have the availability to have internet and electricity and so forth. But what has happened to them and those that I know firsthand all along the coast with me is the inspiration of our conversation today. Every year, somewhere in August, September, and October, we talk about stress testing budgets, and we've had this conversation over. And each year, it evolves as to new technologies, new procedures, new considerations, new worries, and so forth. And this year is no different. We've touched on the topic, but we haven't dedicated ourselves to the topic. So today's topic is related to it and expanded, and that is business recovery and stress testing budgets. They're not the same, but they are intertwined. Stress testing of budgets, as we've always portrayed them these past few years, as we review them in our budget discussions during budget season, which we are still well in the midst of, as we concluded. Actually, we should be at the finalization of authorization of future budgets for 2025. But I asked to go back and ask you to consider some variations that may not have been included in your program this year that should be considered. Let's first talk about the way we've traditionally talked about stress testing budgets. And if you haven't stress test budget or know what I mean by stress testing budgets, it's once you've created the formulation of your budget, the sources of your business, your top line gross revenues, where they're coming from, at what level, at what contributions, based on your historical performance data and future expected businesses and so forth. You break from there all of your cost relationships into your operational budget. Your revenue budget is first because you have to know how much money you're dealing with. And then from there, it goes into how it gets spent and how well you can control the costing to the point of actually net profit, down to the EBITDA line, usually is as far as you have operational input onto when it comes to those things. But in the processes of doing the stress test of budget, once that has been done, you now look at what happens if. Now, you can create an unlimited amount of what if conversations in any condition in life. Budgets are no exception. And you have to limit it to tangible concerns and considerations. That's our first and usual discussion we have with stress testing budgets. What I mean by this is degradation of a channel of resource. Now, we look at this, I mean, obviously from our marketing side, hospitality marketing show, we talk about it from generating of revenues and so forth. I'm not going to talk about operational restrictions, capabilities, and cost cuttings and so forth. Those go into the realm of operations. We actually have a wonderful podcast on operations that's on the hospitality radio channel, radio station that you can go catch, which we do talk about some of the unique individual aspects of operational budget controls. But anyways, we're dealing with marketing. And so we'll be talking about top line gross revenue contributions and channels that do that. Stress testing at the first level is simply the what if conditions of lack of performance. Now, in the world of stress testing, you have two immediate approaches to testing your budget. One is a slow progressive decline, a bleed of performance. We'll get to that. The other is a sudden change, a very fast delta of contrast and change. And that will kind of take on, because it's a little bit simpler of a discussion to handle. You look at your channels of contribution, and you should know your percentages historically as to what each channel produces. What do I mean by channels? Channels are the sources of your business. Paid ads is a channel for your digital marketing campaign. Paid social or organic social are aspects of channels associated with the revenue that they generate. You can look at it from your transient versus your group if you want to go a little higher into the funnel. We'll be focusing on transient more than group, but it's applicable to both circumstances as when you stress test. As to the sources of business by the category that they're in, corporate travel, transient leisure, consortia, wholesale. These are all components of where your sources of business come from. And you, unique to your business, know where they have been from historically. And you've, in your budgeting process, determined how much you want to continue to either maintain that channel contribution, or if you haven't optimized it through your SWOT analysis, expand it as to maybe finding more business value from that channel in particular. Ours is to invert that process when we do stress testing. Ours is to either take it out, which is a sudden change, and or to slowly degrade its performance and determine from that effect on your budget and that loss of contribution from that channel, where else can you compensate based on that channel's loss or degradation. Now, the sudden change, and you say, well, how can it be a sudden change loss? Well, let's take an example of MetaSearch or Google Ads. Wonder if your method of payment and or your account is suspended, paused, because Google wants to change you from a threshold payment program on a credit card to a now invoice-based monthly program. They are very good about just not telling you and shutting off your account and sending you a notice that you are now qualified for invoicing, and you now have to requalify your authentication for payments. Deal with that on a regular basis. And what that can do is create a very sudden change that all of a sudden all these campaigns are actively doing well, nothing's wrong, everything's doing well, boom, aren't. And you have to look at, well, first off, in any evaluation of stress testing, what's the durability of this problem? Is it a short-term problem? If so, how short? Matter of hours or days, weeks, or longer? And that immediately affects as to how then your next progression of choice would be. If it is short, it's really about getting it fixed and very little about what else can be done to the other channels, except for maybe amplify their opportunities, hoping that they can capture some of additional business that they're not doing because you have more funds to dedicate to them. If you know your channel contributions historically, and you know your optimizations of those, you probably already have them built into the processes of what you're doing. You want to always optimize your channels. Sometimes it's self-restricted because you only have a proportioned amount of money you can spend. And since you have to allocate it to all your channels and you feed your more productive, profitable channels first, they may not have gotten their fair share because it's been more of an expensive model to be in that channel. Case in point, GDS. GDS is a more expensive channel than direct channel, giving simple examples. You don't tend to put as much money towards modifying the GDS contribution. Matter of fact, you may not even want much of it. You'll get it out of deference, but without your direct channel contribution being as high as it could be because of lack of paid campaigning being turned off or something, you may feel that it's not a bad time to try to infuse in some money into GDS to, although it being more expensive, still creates your gross revenue flow or contributes to it so that you're not truly being set back as far back as losing the total paid channel until it gets corrected for. That process is stress testing. You determine, If this channel were to go out, what would we do in relationship to that? Now, our example we just gave is a sudden change. It got shut off. So what? And we have the durability factor. Well, it's going to be undetermined amount of time. In the meanwhile, let's do this. These are the first channels we will go to if that would be the case. These are the next level cost channels. These are the next level channels that have room to grow if given more funding. And that's your first stage. That's a simple stress test of your budget. If this, then that. This goes off, then this is our first look at as to, based on durability of the loss, the channels that we would go to see if we can help recover some of the loss that last channel has created for us. As for sudden change, progressive decline is a little harder because that requires diligence and monitoring. And you have to define what it is that you're monitoring. No joke, reality right now is that we have a large proportion of our industry people in roles looking at simplistic data. They haven't transitioned into the full or any additional data that are really available to us now in the world of GA4 and so forth. They're still looking at gross traffic to booking engine, gross traffic conversion, cost of conversion, percentage of related conversion by channel, cost of channel, very simple numbers. And as such, they tend to look at, not exaggerating because green color good, red color bad, arrow up good, arrow bad down for revenue. That is a overall review. Remember, looking at simplistic numbers means that you are aggregating more and more numbers and averaging their impact on other more and more numbers that are also averaged. So you get a very blunted representation of performance. It's accurate in the sense of the data that's being used for it, but it's not revealing as to how and why those numbers are what they are. If you burrow into the numbers, you begin to see the variations of performance. Best example I've been able to give so far, it may seem simplistic. If you're running a race in a race car and it takes you at 7,000 RPM to maintain 100 miles an hour, compared to your competitor, who it only takes 4,000 RPM to maintain 100 miles an hour, one or two things are going to happen. One, you're either going to run out of gas before he does, which is inevitable. Or two, he has much more room to grow where you have very little room before you hit red line and your engine doesn't work anymore. That is a lot about the deltas associated with the performances of your accounts. Picture your accounts as an engine that's running. It may be producing your positive results that you see in the green good, red bad, arrow up good, arrow bad down. But in effect, the clutch is beginning to slip. The oil is beginning to leak. You begin to see a slow degradation of the production of the campaigns. If it's not monitored, I'll tell you in real world what happens. Everybody's looking at the green arrows, red arrows, up, big numbers, little numbers, until they're not. And then it's a Chinese fire drill as to why are we losing? What happened to this? This is this. And then by the time you discover the problem, these ad campaigns died. They went past their maturation. It was for specials that we no longer have. Our competitors have changed rate price, whatever the causation of it is. You have this latency of discovery, this latency of reaction, and this latency of implementation before you begin to get the recovery from those efforts. That dip in performance gives you a gap of value that you don't make it back up. You simply get back into the race. A little bit like going to my car racing analogy. Your engine ran out of oil and it froze up and you coasted into the pit and they had to replace the engine. And while you're doing all this, all the other cars are lapping you and so forth. So by the time you get back out on the track, even though you might be as fast as you were before, as productive as you were before, you knew campaigns when you launched and everything else like this, you are so far behind in your competition, you won't win the race. And you're so far behind in your revenue goals because of the gap, you'll never hit your goals. And this affects everybody, your sales team that has sales goals and everything else. Everybody has to contribute at the level that their budgeting process is said to be for everybody to hit the goals of what they're supposed to get from that. Ownerships, sales teams, incentives, everything. So being able to look at the data deep enough to see the softer deltas, the ones that you begin to see that it is performing, but it's not as performing as well. The production is good, but it wasn't as good as it was before. These early indicators give you the chance in your stress testing to say, What is our replacement to, and what is our KPI threshold? When this performance hits a certain point, because we can go to notifications, it doesn't have to be somebody staring at the gauge waiting for it to go below a certain number. It can be a notification process. We have technology now that can simply say when this channel category ad campaign hits this KPI where it's below, at, or above these numbers, then send me a notification saying that this is happening. So now you're coming into the door and you get a notification saying had ad campaigns 1, 7, and 12 have hit your indicator that their performance is something to be reviewed. Let's go look. Oh, campaign 1, that's interesting. Oh, we got to change this promotion. The promotion needs to cycle out. This one's coming to its end. There's lack of inventory available for it because its ending is the next 3 days. We've sold out. There's nothing available for the next 3 days, so it's not selling anymore, and we're running ads for it. Let's switch it over to campaign 2, which is the one after this that continues on with whatever it is that we're doing. Those kind of decisions happen. Now, instead of having valleys of loss of revenue, you have slow little swales that come through. Yes, it does have negative impacts, but not at the point where it has a substantive impact of negative damage to you. This stress testing of the budgets, of creating these deltas and benchmarks as to what would be a concern if it's not at this level or producing for this or contributing as much. These KPI notification processes need to be built in so that those people that do look at the simple numbers, which is about 95% of all of us that touch numbers in the industry, they see their green, red, good, green, good, green, red, bad kind of things, but they also see another layer of data that's showing the impact of the trends. Remember, we talked about trends and pace, 2 terms that give so little use in our budgeting process and revenue strategies, but they're so critical to the success of them. Trend and pace become such a large conversation in relationship to stress testing budgets. When your trend or your pace begin to show indications of change, the delta, remember deltas, remember statistics? Deltas represent change. You have a large change or a small change, and those have impacts as to what you and how you react. Creating a roadmap, I'm big about roadmaps, a roadmap of what you would do given the certain conditions. If we have a slow declining delta of a channel that's good for contribution, that flags us to go look at what is the cause effect of this delta. Once discovering the cause of the delta, it's determine what it is to rectify. Can it be rectified within the channel, or is this simply a channel issue that now has to be considered as another alternative channel function? Like, our paid social is just not doing all the values we've assigned to it. This could be its contribution percentages, direct channel contribution percentages, whatever KPIs you're coming up with. And there's a variety of them based on your goals. When you see these things happening, you have an immediate first page look at, well, when we thought this through and we stress test this, if this was going to happen, we felt that the best first choice is X. This is what we're going to do. We're going to shift over to the campaigns for whatever is causing the problem into paid campaigns with Google. And this allows us to make sure that we're not caught where that swale or that degradation delta goes too deep in a loss of revenue before we find a solution that will fix it. That is a key component to the discovery of stress testing your budget. Now, that's the stress testing budget conversations that we tend to have related to the ways you approach stress testing, the sudden change and the progressive decline. I want to add to the discussion the business recovery portion. I find it interesting that either it isn't remembered or it wasn't handed forward the crash kits, I guess is a simple way of saying it. When way back when as we were transitioning in technology and people used to bring your credit card and you have a little machine, you were chung, chung, and you had to make a carbon copy of it and sign the receipt and all this other stuff. Yeah, that far back. Some of you before you were born, far back. We used to have what's called a crash kit at a hotel. And what this was is technology had its issues, its quirks. And as the more we relied on technology, the more challenging it was when it didn't work because it was frail and new and it was innovative and sometimes just stuff didn't work. Computers died. We used to have it where all of our data was sitting in a box underneath the cabinet that wasn't ventilated well, and the dust was about an inch thick on the thing on the back, and it toasted the board. Next thing you know, all of our internal data, in-house guest information is gone because the computer that runs it died. So in our crash kits, we always had a requirement. Our night auditor went over and printed all in-house guests, their folios, all their information. So sometimes just a list of those in what room, and all of our arrivals. And with all of that was left the fact that if we lost power, we lost our computer, we lost our terminals, whatever, we at least know who was with us and their status of being with us, whether they paid, didn't pay, whether it was a balance, whatever. And also those that were coming to arrival. So if somebody showed at our desk, we actually knew that they were supposed to be checked in. Now, this was also at times before room keys were made and so forth. We had hard keys to doors. That's how far back it goes. Sometimes we didn't, and we had to go over and open guest doors and so forth until we were able to generate keys for them. Any which way, this crash kit stuff was what we had to do each day, because there was always the day we didn't do it, was the day we needed it. I find that a lot of businesses, hotel businesses, hospitality businesses, do not have a thought through plan as to what happens when shit happens. Case in point, Helene or Ian for us 2 years ago or so forth. We have hotels that got hit, restaurants that got hit. And how do they do what they need to do? Now, the first thing that happens to any time that you are looking at business recovery or impact of these amazing things, these, I wouldn't say unforeseen, but should be anticipated or prepared for events, is that you have 3 conditions that you have to consider what you would be doing. The first condition, you're fully out of service. There is nothing you can do. Your rooms are gutted. There's mud in them. The power's gone. The elevators are trashed. There is no aspect of your facility that can go back to business or be functional. That makes for a very clear decision path. That makes it for you to be able to completely see and navigate. Well, ours is about rebuilding and recovery. We first have to get a full assessment of where we're at, understand the context of what we're looking at to get repaired. We have to look at our breaking out of our folios of insurance and recoveries and who do we contact and so forth. Then there's also HR, which has to do work about communicating with the teams, seeing if there's some way to keep them attached as to what we could use them for, an alternative to what they were doing prior, just to be able to keep them on payroll, or whether we have to make decisions on that as well. That is a whole different path that we're not really talking about, because that's operational and insurance and ownerships and management company decision model trees. I will say with all of the choices I'm about to give you, the first thing you need to do is communicate when available your status to your public, in the priority of those that obviously were with you before. Maybe they had to evacuate, as to anything they may have left behind, depending upon the level of evacuation and the urgency of it. Those people that were already planning on arrival, those people that have booked with you that you have an indeterminate capability of providing service for them for. Like, okay, we need to communicate with those people that we have obligations to immediately. Staff, team, yes, and those guests that we're in that hierarchy. From that, then we communicate with the rest of the world as to where we are. The things you need to do on that, we're going to talk about more of, but you need to have a crash kit, as I'm going to nickname it for anybody to know the familiarity of what you do in your social media communications, your general communications, your emails, and so forth. We're going to talk about that efficiencies in just a little bit. The second state of what your business could be after a tragedy of storms or fires or whatever is a partial ability to operate. You didn't lose everything, or you're able to bring back online some things, but not everything. Your amenities are down, your pool's trash, your spas and so forth, but you have rooms that are functional, safely functional. At that point, you have a gradient scale as to whether that is sellable functional or just utilitarian functional. And the reason why I say this is first branch of decision is because you, depending upon your circumstance, can either be a resource for the recovery of your area, or depending upon the severity of the impact of your area, you could be a resource of revenue to regeneration. Like, hey, look, we're not that bad. We're not completely up to full what we would normally be. But for those that still need to be down here, we have accommodations that are available with the limitations that we have from based on the damage that we sustained. This runs into the category of people coming down volunteering to help, people that have family, they're coming to support their families, people that have been displaced from their homes, emergency response staff and personnel, so forth. And that's the level of, are you in a position to start reselling transient sales? That's the first big decision. Obviously, every business owner wants to get back to business as soon as possible because every day they're not in business is a day it costs them money and not making it. But there's a reality to this as to, what am I selling? I have no pool, or I have no fitness center, I have no beach, or I have no mountain lift. I don't have whatever it is. Why would they be with you? So a good market shift is to who would need us in the facilities that we have available, and that usually falls into the categories of first responders, family support, localized support, so forth and so on, that need accommodations, displaced. And you need to decide now what that means. What are we going to do? You know, what you charge, if you charge, what can you offer, what you can't offer, what services can and can't be sustained, so forth and so on. We could spend a long time, and you should spend your own time on what does that mean, being partially available, and what context is our current market situation, in what context can we provide services that don't work negatively against us. And again, certain considerations about communication we'll talk about in generalities in just a minute. The third state of consideration for business recovery is you're fully available. You weathered the storm, literally. You're in good shape, moderate damage, nothing that can't be fixed and hasn't been fixed in a very short period of time. Um, you can operate as you have been, but there has to be an assessment of value of who you will be selling to. Depending upon the severity and your proximity to it, you still may be following under the conditions being partially, where really the best service you can provide are those that are helping everyone else that may have been less fortunate than you. And having the first responders and having the support people in the family and everybody else that needs accommodations or displaced people to have accommodations. It might be better for you to go that path than to think that you're going to sell at sunny and 72, come on back down, we didn't get damaged. That's a very selfish centric way of approaching and very tone deaf to your community, by thinking that you're going to act like everything's normal when everything isn't. That assessment aside, you're good enough and your market is good enough. Yes, damage has been sustained, but the recovery was incredibly quick. There was a big community effort. Everybody wants to get back into business. The restaurants want to open. They want to get back to being able to have people come down. It's not severe enough to deter most people, but it is severe enough for people to question their interest in coming down. Case in point, Southwest Florida. It sustained some damage, which was quickly recovered from. Some things are still not quite as they were, in the sense of restaurants are not quite yet back to operating. So there's some reduction as to options to eat and so forth. The beach isn't as clean and pretty as it was because it's being shoveled around with bulldozers and so forth to redo the berms and what have you. But it is still a beautiful beach, and it's still wonderful, and it's still nice weather for right now, so forth and so on. Well, the considerations also are, is it in a place that people are not going to want to make long-term plans because there's still the opportunity of a storm? Florida deals with this market type all the time. When we're in hurricane season, and especially in September and October, is always the predication, if not now, when? And if so, if us. And there's a level of preparation that we always have to maintain, which regrettably places like the Carolinas and Tennessee don't, and that's why they're suffering also incredibly harder in many ways in that sense as well. But it also dampens the demand to come to our market. People choosing their transient dollar spend don't want to go to a questionable place if, one, it's still expensive, even though it's nice and probably worth the price we're asking for it. But it also has the question mark of, I make all these plans to go down there only to have to cancel all those plans and fight for my refunds, maybe, depending upon the rate that was purchased. Like advanced purchase, prepay, shouldn't even be offered during September and October down here, but not without the guarantee of repaying it back, which defeats the actual offer. Think about that. Anyways, compared to going to some other place that may be less prone to that indecision of something happening where I'd have to cancel my plans. You start talking about taking a flight from wherever you're at down to Florida and going to a resort on the beach, so forth and so on, and then having to break that back down, okay, and go to the airline that doesn't want to give a refund because it's a cognitive choice you don't want to make, until such as the weather is so bad that they are then willing to allow you to reschedule at no fee, but you have to wait for it to get that bad for them to do that option, which means you can't predicate the problem correction by simply changing your flight to a place that now is more accommodating and less likely to have a problem, unless you have the money to just let both float. That's the reality of the travel. It's like, okay, I have X amount of money and I bought my airline tickets to go down to Florida. There's a storm coming. I don't want to worry about getting caught in it, but it's not been notified enough that when I go to the airlines, they're saying, hey, you can't change the flight, and there's no reason to change the flight because the storm hasn't been dedicated to hitting us yet. Yeah, but it's going to be in that area, and I'm going to have a crappy vacation. I don't want to go anymore. Yeah, tough. Until they notify us that the storm's coming, then we'll offer the refund. You're stuck. Now all of a sudden you can't book another flight because that's all the money you had was to fly by the first flight, and you can't make an alternative plan, but you're going to have to cancel that one. So by the time they allow you to cancel it, you've lost the window of vacation to go someplace else. It's the reality of these things. We can help with that process. We can help with that process in communications. And that's the part I want to get to the most about this is out of all three circumstances and whatever conditions each of them represent and whatever conditions you represent yourself in the community based on all the modifiers I just talked about, the actual impact of the community and so forth, there are some things you need to do that are consistent throughout all three of them. And that is communicate openly with all the people that are involved. First, your team. Hiding or falsifying in the sense of being overly optimistic without really truly expressing the concerns, communicating with them so they understand the plans, they understand the conditions that you're going to be making decisions in and so forth, so they feel like they're part of the process rather than uncertainty. Because amazingly, when you lose communications and so forth, you lose communications with your team. And now your team doesn't know, am I supposed to show up for work? Am I showing up for work? Do I still have a job? Don't have a job? Is the place destroyed, or is it someplace I can go back to work? And then you're putting them at risk to find that out, because then they're trying to figure out how to get to you to get that answer. You need to have predication as to how you're going to communicate with people. What is the authoritative way? Because everybody's going to talk in social media. Everyone's going to have an opinion. Everyone's going to have an angle. I drove by the hotel. Man, it looked like it was trash. The sign was blown out. There was stuff in the drive. And yet, in fact, it was just cosmetic, and that the hotel's fine. It just needs to get cleaned up, and they're wanting the team to come back, but they have no way to communicate that. How do you implement these protocols? A lot of hotels, resorts, don't have clear protocols. I would say more have protocols in the Caribbean and Florida and the Gulf Coast, because we've had these circumstances come up enough that these things have warranted the decisions necessary. But in places that don't have to deal with it at that scale, so tragically what's been happening now in the central United States, these aren't protocols that are in place. And even if they were in place, the tragedy of the disaster may be so extreme that they don't even have it as an option, that there is no cell tower to use phones. There's no texting that can be done because the system is down. There's no internet to go over and communicate on a website or anything like this. There is no means minus carrier pigeon to let people know what they need to know about your business. That's important. And you can't solve every problem, but you can certainly create conditions of solving most of the first level and second level problems. Third tier problems, ultimate disasters, catastrophes, and things are just not fully solvable, but they can be planned for in the sense of what to do once they're in a condition to be influenced. Okay, once we get cell tower back, this is what we do. Once we get internet back, this is what we can do. Those types of things. Others is the communication necessary to be on all three branches, that you need to qualify. First, talking to your team, which we just discussed. Second, qualifying to those people you're obligated to, which were people that you were engaged with at the time of the disaster, people that were anticipating coming after that time frame, arrival guests and so forth, and those people that have bookings with you based on the range of what that booking date was, to let them know whether they can be, that you can honor that. And of course, communicating with the public. Now, the first thing to do in this kind of crash kit scenario of social media in particular is all scheduled campaigns, promotions, social posts, everything gets turned off before you can't lose the ability to turn them off. When you know something's going to happen, a storm is coming your way, pause everything. Pause everything. There's nothing worse. There's always something worse. It's bad to have an ad that you had scheduled to go out about how wonderful to visit the resort. When you're watching the news right next to it, right? Maybe it actually got featured in the news, as a commercial break of come to such and such place. It's beautiful. And then the news is talking about how it's ultimately destroyed and or flooded or in the middle of a hurricane or whatever. That, people always say, well, that was pretty strange. You get noted for the fact that you didn't turn it off. You don't want that false messaging. Same too with your social media posts. It's sunny in 72. Come down and join us. Yet in the news, we know that our beaches were destroyed. Uh, or, here's a special promotion. Come visiting us. And it's like, wait a minute, the hotel was just on the news as being destroyed. Or worse yet, and this is where, blame the intern kind of thing. Something gets posted that's tone deaf. It's so beautiful to be in XYZ location. And yet in the news, the XYZ location was destroyed. You pause everything, pause all your scheduling, pause all your advertisement, and you have a centralized authority that can only be the only ones that post communications. Nobody else can just post for you. Anybody, agency-wise or anything, unless you've designated them and you coordinate with them the specificities of how you would communicate. You have an authoritative source of communication. This goes to emergencies for your hotel forever. But in the case of business recovery and so forth, this has to go across the gambit of whether you're fully disabled, partially disabled, or fully enabled. It covers the pantheon of this. Make sure that only the authority figure that has the clarity of what wants to be communicated has the means to do so on all of the channels that represent your business, all your social channels, any of your communication media, any authoritative communication with authorities. There is a centralized single point of communication that is the only authorization to do it. Everybody else is suspended and if probably taken off the accounts, if not degraded down so they can't do anything so that there's no mistakes made. All of your automations of your schedulings, advertisement campaigns, everything gets off. Turn off the campaigns. Until you have a clarity of a timeline and a perspective of the condition of your properties and what you're going to move forward with, there's absolutely no reason to have those things operating, because at any stage of any of the things we just talked about, totally disabled, partially disabled, fully functional, you have conditions within each of those as to what your service role is. Is it going to be limited to those that can be helpful to the community? Is it going to be expanded to trying to get transient business in, and so forth and so on? That's the critical, important aspects of all this. We're going to put the next week's show towards what do you do when it's good enough to sell? Part of the fully able component to this, what we just talked about. But now you've been marked. I'll take case in point of why I'm saying that we're going to put in next week's show. Southwest Florida. We received additional damage from Helene. There's currently turmoil still because it's in the middle of peak of hurricane season right now. October has the greatest number of hurricanes that happen. That there's something still in the Gulf that's going to be coming our way again. That means that if anybody's looking to travel, for them to travel, they're kind of taking us off the equation. The Caribbean has dealt with this at a great degree because everyone sees it as an inclusive single entity. So if there's a hurricane in the Caribbean, people have this mental picture that it affects all the islands in the Caribbean. I used to be on the CHA board, Caribbean Hotel Association board, before it merged with the tourism board, and I was in charge of their marketing. And it was a constant problem. The hurricane may have been on the Leeward Islands, but everyone was canceling their reservations in Aruba. It's like there's nothing there correlated, but everyone equates the Caribbean together. Same too with what happens in Florida. Because of what's happened with Florida, people are taking it off of their interest categories for now, simply because why run the risk? Like I just described about the flights and the cancellations, getting your money back and reorganizing your trip and everything else like this. Why go through all of that unless there's a really huge burning yearning desire to come down to our market? What do we do for strategy? Some of it's rate related. Some of it is consumer and communications related. There are ways to still do good business, even though the demand is different. It's being smarter about who you're talking to, what you're talking about, and what you're offering for it. We'll talk about more of it next week. So I feel good about the conversation in relationship to business recovery and stress testing budget. I think we hit some good points to it. Of course, every year we have our stress testing discussion. We keep expanding it. We do talk about the progressive declines versus the sudden changes for stress testing. But I feel that, adding in the business recovery portion of it and talking about the stages of being fully out, partially out, fully available, and what to do and how to consider, and making crash kits, an old term for new technology, are all important elements of what you need to consider you haven't in your budget process as you go through the finalization of your budget. I ask you to review back what is your current plans. Do you have contacts with all of your local business entities, government entities, so that if you are going to make your hotel available to FEMA crews, or does your sales teams already make those correlations as to what rate and what you're offering, what's the inventory amount, and so forth? Do you have the parking capacities? There's so many things to do that business with those entities that you need to make sure you're cleared up with first before going and just thinking, well, we'll just call them once we make that choice, we'll call them and offer it. It's too late by that point. They already have their plans, and they're good about planning. They're good about organizing, and they know what they're going to be using as resources. So get in that conversation if you need to, and you should. I think we've hit all the things, as I said. For everyone that's watching us live around the world, 209 countries, thank you so much for taking the time for us today. Those watching us on simulcast, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. Not Twitter, excuse me. Skip to it. We're off Twitter. That's a cesspool of junk. Twitch, so forth. We're on the simulcast for that. Our TV channel, the Hospitality Channel, we're always live on that. Thank you for that. You can catch our reruns. We've rebroadcast this show at 11:30 a.m. Sydney, Australian time for our APAC friends, 11:30 London time for our EU and Mideast friends. Although that being said, I see people on the board that are from areas of both. So thank you for that. Strange time zones, but thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, you can reach me two different ways. One is email, lauren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com. And the other is if you want to go and leave an audio message, do hdm.news/talkback. And leave me a message that way. You'll answer the question I leave there if you want to have an opinion about that. Tell me whether or not I can refer to you or authorize its usage, or just comment about what you've said. But you can do that on that side as well. If all reruns on all of our shows, all of our podcasts, you can catch at hospitalitychannel.tv. We do have an app on Apple iOS and or Google Play, Hospitality Channel. You can catch our TV channel there. There's a lot of content on the paid wall behind it, but our show is always free. You can always watch for that. And of course, our hospitality radio station runs our podcast, Hospitality Marketing Podcast, and a variety of other content from great authority people from our industry around the world are on it. And it's a scheduled broadcast of a lot of content 24/7. And that is the hospitalityradio.com. And I think we've hit all the bases. My name is Lauren Gray. Thank you for the privilege of your time, and I look forward to talking to you all next week.